Broadcasting around the world, this is On the Record with Christian Briggs. Serious talk about what's happening around the world and how it affects you. Unfiltered truth for a world on edge. Follow us on X at BMC_HAM. Live in 3, 2, 1.
This is On the Record. I'm your host, Christian Briggs, and today we're looking at a conflict that may quietly reshape the global balance of power, because while the world is focused on Iran, the real story might be China. The war in Iran is not just another regional crisis. It may be the most strategically consequential event for Beijing in more than a decade. This conflict strikes at the core of China's global strategy, energy security, Middle East influence, sanctions, evasion, and even its long-term posture toward Taiwan. And China's response? Fast but revealing public condemnations, calls for de-escalation, diplomatic outreach, but no real leverage, no real control. And that tells us something important.
China needs the oil and gas that pass through the Strait of Hormuz. More broadly, the country is not a rogue state like Russia. It understands that its growth depends on open sea lanes, functioning markets, and steady rules of the game.
For years, many assumed China and Iran were aligned ideologically, partners in an anti-Western alliance. That's not actually true. China's relationship with Iran has always been transactional, strategic, calculated, cold. Beijing embedded itself deep into Iran's infrastructure, building telecommunications networks, supporting surveillance systems, helping construct the digital architecture that allows the regime to control its population.
China has signed a 25-year deal with Iran. They have promised to invest some $400 billion in the country, $400 billion over 25 years. In other words, Iran is China's long-term bet in West Asia.
This wasn't about ideology. It was about leverage, about access, and most importantly, about oil. But here's the shift. China never needed Iran, the regime. It needed what Iran provided: cheap sanctioned oil, geographic positioning, and controlled instability in the region. Now, that equation is breaking down. This is where things get dangerous for Beijing. China is the world's largest importer of crude oil, and Iran has been one of its most important suppliers. At one point, nearly all of Iran's exported oil was going to China. Add Venezuela into the mix, another sanctioned supplier, and you're looking at a significant portion of China's energy coming from politically unstable sources. But the real vulnerability isn't just supply, it's transit. More than half of China's crude imports pass through the Strait of Hormuz. And right now, that's the center of the crisis.
The single biggest destination for crude oil transiting the Strait of Hormuz is China. Nearly 5 million barrels of oil a day before the war, which, just to put that number in context, is somewhere around a quarter of the oil China consumes in a day.
Following the strikes, tanker traffic began shifting. Insurance costs surged. Some vessels avoided the region entirely. Oil prices spiked fast, not because supply disappeared overnight, but because risk exploded. And for China, that risk translates directly into economic pressure. Higher energy costs mean more expensive manufacturing, more inflation, weaker consumer demand at a time when China is already trying to stabilize its economy. Yes, China has reserves. Yes, it can lean more heavily on Russian oil, but even that has limits, especially if shipping routes remain unstable. Behind the scenes, Beijing is already doing something very telling. It's quietly pressuring Iran not to escalate. Here's where the situation becomes more complex, because on paper, this war could actually benefit China if the United States becomes deeply entangled in the Middle East. That means fewer resources, less attention, and less focus on the Indo-Pacific.
This war is exhausting the U.S. military. As this war goes on, the U.S. will keep burning through munitions. Just consider the Tomahawk cruise missile. The U.S. only produces 80 of those missiles every year. And how many have they fired? Around 400 missiles were fired in the first 72 hours. That's 5 years' worth of missiles gone in 3 days. So what happens if China pulls the trigger on Taiwan? Does the U.S. have enough firepower to defend Taiwan?
We've seen this before. During the Iraq War, China expanded rapidly while the U.S. was distracted. And today, the stakes are even higher. A prolonged conflict could also deplete U.S. weapon stockpiles, many of which rely on rare earth materials that China controls. So yes, there is potential upside for Beijing. But here's the problem. The risks are immediate. The benefits are theoretical. China can tolerate U.S. distraction. It cannot tolerate an energy crisis. This creates a strategic paradox. China wants the conflict, but only to a point. It wants pressure on the United States without disruption to global energy flows. And that's a balance it cannot control. For years, China positioned itself as a rising power broker in the Middle East. It brokered normalization between Saudi Arabia and Iran. It expanded infrastructure investments. It embedded its technology across the Gulf. But that strategy depended on one critical factor: controlled instability, enough tension to create opportunity, but not enough to trigger chaos. This war destroys that balance.
It's about self-reliance. That's what Xi Jinping wants the country to focus on, removing its reliance from the West, obviously removing its reliance from the Middle East on oil, but really becoming a global leader in industries, particularly AI and quantum computing.
Now, China cannot restrain Iran, protect its partners, or guarantee stability in the region. And Gulf states are watching. They're beginning to ask a simple question: can China actually provide security or just economic partnerships? This conflict doesn't stay in the Middle East. It reaches all the way to the Pacific, because China's long-term strategy for Taiwan depends on three things: stable energy supplies, reliable trade routes, and the ability to divert U.S. attention elsewhere. This war threatens all three. If oil flows become unstable, China's economy weakens. If Gulf states shift toward Washington, China loses influence. If Iran's proxy network breaks down, the U.S. regains strategic flexibility. In other words, the road to Taiwan runs through the Middle East, and right now, that road is becoming far more uncertain. There's another layer to this: Russia. At first glance, this war helps Moscow. Higher oil prices mean more revenue, and a distracted United States benefits Russia's position in Ukraine. But there's a deeper shift happening. The United States has temporarily allowed Russia to sell more oil to India. That changes everything. Russia now has higher volumes, more stable buyers, and stronger revenue streams. That reduces its dependence on China, and that weakens Beijing's leverage. So now we have a new dynamic. Russia becomes more independent, China becomes more vulnerable, and Iran becomes the weakest link. This isn't just about oil. The entire regional system is under stress. Air routes are disrupted, shipping lanes are rerouted, supply chains are slowing down, trade corridors through Turkey and the Caucasus are becoming congested, maritime traffic is being diverted around Africa, adding weeks to global shipping times. Tourism is collapsing across the region, and supply chains are becoming more fragile. This is what a systemic shock looks like. Not one failure, but multiple pressures hitting at once. There's one more layer most people aren't seeing: the shadow financial system. For years, China, Iran, and Russia have relied on gold transfers, cash networks, and crypto channels, all designed to bypass Western sanctions. This war disrupts all three. Gold movement becomes harder, cash networks slow down, crypto channels face increased scrutiny. That means higher costs, slower transactions, and more risk. China's losing flexibility, and flexibility is everything in a crisis. So what does all of this mean? The Iran war isn't just a regional conflict. It's a stress test for China's economy, for its global strategy, and for its ability to operate beyond its borders. And right now, China is facing rising costs, shrinking leverage, and a rapidly narrowing window to shape the world around it. This is On the Record, unfiltered, uncompromised, and always one step ahead.
Gold has more than tripled since September 2022, rising from $1,656 per ounce to over $5,000 by February 2026. That's a 205% gain, outperforming the market, and proving why gold is the ultimate long-term hedge. As global debt soars and currencies weaken, central banks are hoarding gold at record pace. Why aren't you? Call 844-426-4653 or visit bmcham.com. Protect your future with real assets. Own gold now.